Welcome, Rob. Thank you very much for being here.
Happy to do it.
So let's, the issue that we've been hounding you on here for months and months and months, the short-term media rights with reallocating the old ESPN rights. You want to make some news here today? Where do we stand?
Well, what did Jimmy say?
Jimmy said you're making great progress.
You know, my New Year's resolution was to not contradict Jimmy publicly, so we're making great progress with ESPN. You know, we have kind of agreements in principle. We still have issues that need to be resolved. They are the agreements that have been reported publicly, and, you know, we hope to push them across the finish line.
So for the benefit of everybody here in the audience, what has been out there, including at FOS, is the recalibrated ESPN package, Netflix for the Home Run Derby, and then NBC on Sunday nights. Broad strokes, that fundamentally accurate?
Yeah, and the wild card with
yes.
NBC as well. You know, look, if those are the agreements that we get all the way through and finish them, you know, we feel like we made real progress. We feel like Sunday Night Baseball on broadcast television is important. You know, we've worked really hard to keep ESPN in as a partner, and we think starting with Netflix is a really exciting opportunity for us.
The ESPN piece of this really interesting because going back to spring training, your relationship was in a different place. A lot of invective out there. If you walk us through that journey over the last 7 months to get to where you're at now.
Well, there wasn't so much invective, you know.
Well, within the context of your 35-year relationship, it was a departure.
Yeah. Look, you know, we always, I think that there was a mutuality of interest in terms of staying partners, and it took the parties a little while to think creatively about how we could do that and meet, you know, goals that were not exactly aligned. And, you know, Jimmy and I had a conversation in Sun Valley, and it kind of went from there.
Sort of peeling back from that a little bit, just given all the disruption out there and different corporate priorities, is that sort of the new normal that we might have a little bit more disruption to get from A to B in terms of getting a rights deal done with anybody?
I don't know about if I would use the word disruption. I think it's going to be harder to make decisions about what partners you keep, when you move on. You know, I think the tension between, you know, the reach of broadcast on the one hand and the monetary rewards that are available with some of the streaming companies is going to make the decisions more complicated. It's going to implicate reach as well as economics. And, you know, I think that, you know, maybe the deciding factor, particularly in our case, because we have so much content, you know, we need offering that is fan-friendly in terms of fans knowing and being able to find the games on a regular basis. You know, 2,430 games, a lot of games. And, you know, that discoverability issue is really going to be important going forward.
As you began this process, as the season started reallocating these short-term rights, the goal was ultimately to get to a place with more money in the aggregate and more reach. Are you going to get there?
Yeah, we certainly feel like we get A+ on the reach. We've essentially replicated where we would have been if ESPN hadn't opted out. I mean, that's the easiest way for me to think of it.
So rough parity in terms of the economics.
Rough parity. And remember, you know, we made a strategic decision after the opt-out that impacted the economics available to us. We had for quite some time been of the view that the best place for us to be in 2028 was to have all of our rights available, have the flexibility to deliver packages to our potential partners that was what they wanted to buy as opposed to, you know, maybe what we had historically offered. And so, you know, we determined early on we weren't going past 2028. And obviously when you're in a shorter term deal like that, it, you know, impacts the economics that are going to be available to you. Broadcasters like longer deals.
Sure. And you yourself had made the mention earlier in the season that doing a midterm deal like this was not your first choice.
It wasn't our first choice. I will tell you, there's a side benefit to you. It gets you in the market earlier. You know, you're talking about selling your 3 years. But you're also, it's close enough that you start talking to people about, what 2028 could look like. And I think that was sort of a silver lining in that cloud.
So I did want to obviously get into 2028 and sort of pulling back. What is the grand vision there? It seems like take all the national rights, as much local rights as you can get, and sort of take the magic 8 ball, so to speak, and shake it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it a different way. I think about it as going to the table or going to the market, maybe more accurately, with maximum flexibility to put the pieces together in a way that gives you reach that's necessary to preserve and enhance the popularity of the sport long term, but also get you the economics that you need to keep the sport growing from a revenue perspective. I think that there will be more games available in national packages is my bet, but I could be wrong about that. We got 3 years to go. But I also think that local's not going away when you have 2,430 games. We're going to need a local solution for those games that are not available in national packages.
To that end, you just went through kind of a bruising chapter of trying to figure out what was going to happen with Diamond, now Main Street Sports. As you sort of navigate all of this, what do you see as the role of a regional sports network in this new future you're contemplating?
Look, I think it's, everybody knows, it's a very challenged model as a result of the cord cutting. And I do think for a period of time, the RSNs will continue to play a role. The question is really what comes next. That's the more interesting question, I think.
As you do that, what has been the sentiment of the clubs? You've got a situation with, very different markets, very different media situations, different ownership structures. Getting commonality on that, I would imagine, really not easy.
No, I think that the clubs have come a long way on this particular issue. I think that they understand that in order to maximize your revenue in today's media environment, you have to be more national, that getting more national, getting more games out there on a national basis has to be your number one priority. Everybody seems to buy into that. I think there's a little more trepidation on, what's going to happen with games that are not included in those national packages. Some teams are protected by long-term deals with third parties that, some have parent guarantees that make them pretty viable. Others, are going to be looking for an alternative for those games. And I think even with respect to those games, they understand that a centralized approach to monetizing those assets is what's going to be necessary going forward. And it's the key to what I talked about a minute ago. If you think about it, if you do national deals and a certain number of games are included, the games that are left over, if there's a centralized approach there, it's a lot easier to get into a world where a fan has a reduced number of places to look for a particular game. For me, the ideal would be, for example, having either an MLB network-based or a digitally-based kind of fallback where you always know if it's not a national game, I'm going to be able to find it one of these two places.
We hear a lot about this here in New York, that Yankees or Mets on 5 different channels in the course of 5 consecutive nights. I imagine, and we hear this in other sports as well, I imagine that's something you want to clean up.
100%. We'd like to make it easier on the fan. I mean, they are the most important party here in terms of our business. And, look, it is different places, you got to pause and think, where might it be tonight? That's not ideal from a fan's perspective.
So when you get to 28, you'll obviously have all your national rights expired and back out in the market. Mm-hmm. Local, half the teams, 2/3 of the teams, what is the contemplation in terms of how much local you will have in the market as part of that?
I think that if I had to guess today, we would have availability of all 30 clubs when we go to the market in 2028.
And what needs to happen structurally between the league office and the clubs to make that happen?
That's a complicated, look, the best I can do for you on that right now is to say we're not going to centralize local media as a standalone deal. There'll have to be other gives and takes that make sense for all the clubs.
So, of course, that sort of then intersects with what the sort of overall economic framework of the sport is, which then kind of dovetails to what the situation is with the players. There's been a lot of noise out there already and fearful of what's going to happen in 2027. To a fan out there who may be concerned, what is your message to them at this point?
Look, I think the best I can tell you is that what's out there right now is noise. No decisions have been made by ownership as to strategy, actual content of what we're going to propose. We're a year away. To me, the focus should be on the fact that, we're having a great late season, great run to the playoffs. We're going to have a great playoffs, I'm sure. There's a lot of time, a lot of water is going to go over the dam before anybody can tell you what's going to happen with labor. We do believe, and this is maybe the most important point, we do believe the sport has great momentum right now. We think the rule changes, our attendance, our ratings, all on the upswing. Obviously, those of us, and it's obviously a team effort, a lot of great people, both at the clubs and in the commissioner's office, have worked hard to create this momentum, and we'd like to keep that momentum going.
So, within that construct, then, cap talk premature, certainly at this point?
We're not, the owners haven't decided. It's like members of the media have decided that because someone once said salary within 2 of cap, that's where we're going. When we're ready to make a proposal, we'll make it to the union and we'll tell people what it is.
In the meantime, you've been having meetings with players going from city to city, team to team. What has that dialogue been like?
Yeah, to me, the key to a good collective bargaining relationship is ongoing communication. And this is my 3rd year of doing this. I felt it was really necessary coming out of the negotiations in 2022. Each meeting is different. It depends on the makeup of the club. Sometimes it's about economic issues, the player compensation system. Sometimes it's about rule changes. Sometimes it's about scheduling. It just depends on the team. And, that's how I want it to be. I mean, my goal is just to impress upon the players that we want to hear what they're thinking about so that it can play into our thinking about where we're going to be longer term on labor. We want to know what their concerns are, what's of interest to them, so that we can try to address them.
We're almost to the end of the regular season. Attendance up just a slight tick, a little less than 1%. Stronger gains across much of the TV, local and national, and then certainly some more big gains on MLB TV. As you sort of put all that together and sort of put a bow on the regular season, what conclusions are you drawing?
I think I'd go back to the word I used earlier. I think it's a continuation of the momentum that we've seen in the game. I think you tie it back to the fundamentals. Talk to your fans, figure out what they think about the game you're putting on the field, try to make the game better with rule changes, and there's benefits that can be reaped. I mean, even this year, you're right, up a tick. We are playing in 2 minor league ballparks, which is a little bit of a drag on your attendance. But despite that, we're going to be up above 70 million again and at or close to last year, which I see as a real accomplishment for the sport. And that momentum, really important going into 2026.
Certainly some impact continued still from the changes you made a few years back with the pitch clock and the larger bases and so forth. That whole experience, how is that potentially informing what you're thinking about now vis-a-vis realignment and some potentially other bigger changes down the pike?
Well, more than what I think, it's what the owners think. And, I think that the process that we went through with that set of rule changes was really instructive for the owners. We relied on fan research at the outset. We did a ton of testing to make sure that we had a very good feel for what was going to happen when you roll these rule changes out in the field. Unexpected results with rule changes are a huge problem. Our predictions turned out to be very accurate in terms of what was going to happen on the field. fan reaction was positive, and that gives you the ability to go back to owners and say, hey, look, we can change. We can change again, and we can do it in a way that's going to make your business better as opposed to causing some disruption. I think the asset that we have today is, our ownership group has changed a lot. I was around when the last Commissioner Vincent started talking about realignment, and, the first thing you heard from owners when that conversation started was, I'm a National League Central team. I can't be anything other than a National League Central team ever. Today,
still two different business entities back then.
Right. But today, when you talk about a topic like realignment, owners say, okay, explain to me how you think it's going to drive my business. That's a very different mentality, and I think the change we've gone through has helped us get there.
So what is the expectation of realignment and probably in concert with that expansion?
Yeah, you think about it, it's funny, I have said this about realignment for a decade. For some reason, the last time I said it, people got very focused on it. I would say this, you got to remember, there's a series of decisions that have to be made. Number one, you got to decide that you're willing to expand. That decision, how easy or hard it is, depends in part on how much central revenue you generate, right? And how the owners are going to react to creating 2 additional shares of that central revenue. Assuming you get over that hump, that they want to expand, then it's where, right? What 2 cities do you take? And you have to get through that. And then once the cities are in place, you can start thinking about, really, I see 2 huge issues. One is travel. People forget 162 games in 186 days. With all the travel that goes along with that, particularly with the schedule we're playing now, right?
Now that you have an unbalanced schedule.
More balanced. That's a huge, more balanced.
Balanced schedule.
It's still unbalanced, but it's more balanced than it used to be. That's a huge consideration in terms of the health and kind of well-being of our players. Equally important, the idea, it's not an accident that the NBA, for example, plays up geographically, out of the East, out of the West. It makes the days when you're playing multiple playoff games, which we do the most of, a lot easier to format when you got 4 games if you have West Coast playing West Coast as opposed to West Coast playing East Coast in those early rounds.
Any potential thinking of when this timing on this, and obviously this is intertwined with the labor and media that we discussed.
Yeah, I'd like to, when I think about the things, I'd like to there's no way we're getting 2 more teams on the field before I'm done. I'd like to pick the teams before I'm done, is what I've said publicly.
But a lot of this is getting handed off to the next person, whoever that is.
Yeah, I think that the actual implementation of putting 2 more teams on the field will be on the next person. Yeah.
You mentioned the 2 minor league teams. The A's and the Rays have been sort of a thorny issue on a number of instances. Mm-hmm. Is there greater hope now that we're looking at potentially a new owner in Tampa and construction is going in Las Vegas?
Yeah, I would say, let me take them one at a time. I think that the situation in Tampa has a lot of kind of promising developments. I think the potential for the sale to a group that has, huge, deep roots in Tampa would be a definite positive development in terms of the long term for the franchise. In the short term, I think there's 3 or 4 panels that are up on the Trop. The idea, everyone knows what we and fans generally think about the Trop as a long-term solution. It's a great solution for 2026 compared to playing in a minor league ballpark with no roof in the Tampa climate. So I think things are looking up in Tampa, headed the right direction. Vegas, has been one of those things that I never, from the day we took the relocation vote, had 1 second's doubt that stadium was going to get built in Las Vegas. For some reason, in the media, there was this continuing nagging doubt. I think John Fisher 100% committed to being in Las Vegas, building a great venue and making that club successful. Certainly had the financial resources to do it no matter what lefts and rights came along the way. I was really pleased to get to the groundbreaking. I think it was, concrete demonstration that there will be a team in Las Vegas.
Now, going back to the Rays, you've been pretty consistent that you believe in this market. You want that team there. I do.
I think, I think Florida is the right place for that team. I think that, there are opportunities in the Tampa Bay region that can be exploited in order to get a new stadium and keep the team there.
So that's my question. Can that deal be resurrected, or is it ostensibly starting from scratch?
I think with new ownership, I think you have to assume it's kind of a clean slate. That they're going to decide about location. They're going to have to build and make relationships and contacts with people throughout the region to decide what's the best place for the ballpark in order to make the Rays successful over the long haul.
But theoretically, could be on either side of the bay.
Certainly. Yeah, I mean they're going to have the same options that the prior owner had in terms of one side or the other.
You talked about sort of nationalizing the media before, and in terms of marketing your stars, the league has taken a lot of hits over the years. Why aren't MLB stars at the same level as in other sports? What is your sense of the progress on that? It seems like for people like Paul Skeens and Ellie De La Cruz coming out of small markets, that there's been some progress in that area.
Yeah, look, I mean, sort of a little derisive, some progress. I think we made great progress in that area. I think that, the social media program that we run with, literally hundreds of players, putting them in a position to provide, particularly our younger fans, the kind of inside look that they want, been really, really important to that effort. Every sponsorship deal that Noah Uzma and Bill Morningstar do has a player activation component to it. Dedicated dollars to get a player involved alongside our assets. I think if you look at the advertising that we have done, we have not made a commercial since I became commissioner that was not 100% player focused. I think all of those things added together, has raised the profile of our biggest stars. Certainly hard to argue with that with respect to somebody like Ohtani. But I also think players in smaller markets, as you point out, have benefited from that effort. I think that as we get more national media exposure, I think those efforts will continue to move forward.
Shifting gears to the international front, you mentioned Ohtani, and you've had some very big numbers in Japan. You just did a big deal with Netflix for the World Baseball Classic rights, all sorts of history made last year for the World Series, and then again for the season opener. Other places like Europe, it's been a little bit more fits and starts. Where do you kind of see in totality your international efforts?
Well, I think that our approach to international has always been country by country, largely because we find the places we're interested in to be different in different stages of development. So I think that, with respect to Japan and Korea, we've made investments there. We monetarily and players in terms of the sweat equity involved of, making a trip to Tokyo to open the season, making a trip to Seoul to open the season, that we have started to see return on those investments. I think that the opportunity to monetize the great fan base that we have in Japan and Korea will show up in terms of purely international revenue, but it will also show up in our national media deals. I think my prediction is there will be some of the newer media companies, the streamers will be really interested in the ability to get access to well-developed economies where they don't have as much penetration as they do in countries like the United States and Canada. So it's going to show up in different places out of those developed economies. We remain interested in Europe. We think London is an important jumping off point for us. We have a facility that has come a long way since the first Yankee-Red Sox game. It's a much better ballpark now than it was due to their willingness to make investments in that. We continue to believe that there's an opportunity there, and that we can get at the developed economies in Europe through that London entree. And then the other two that I'd mention, India, the bat and ball sport kind of affinity, we think continues to present an opportunity for us. That's a grassroots effort. You're really starting from the bottom up. And then Mexico, I think we have worked very hard to develop better relationships with the Mexican professional leagues. We think we can ultimately build those relationships in a way that they look like Japan and Korea. The domestic professional league thrives, but we have enough players coming to the U.S. to play that it drives our business here in the U.S.
Final question. We're just about to get into the playoffs. It looks like we're going to have a pretty interesting mix, small markets, upstart teams. What should we be looking for throughout the course of October?
Yeah, look, I think you're going to have really exciting playoffs. The teams that look like they're going to be in, if you think about the way they play the game, you still have the big home run reliant clubs, and then you have a club like Milwaukee that relies on speed, getting people on base. I think we're going to have some really interesting matchups as we move through the players and a great mix of teams.
Well, we want to thank MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred for spending this time with us. We're going to go now into a coffee break.